Hi, my name's Elliot Symonds and I'm Head of Learning and Development at Jarrell Training. Welcome to my world-famous seminar, which is subtitled Bloomin Dogs, but it's really about criteria-based assignments, essays at ILM Level 3. Once upon a time, there was an elephant who went for a walk down by the river. And as the elephant was dipping down to take a drink from that delicious stream, a turtle swam up to him. The elephant kicked the turtle and it flew to the other side of the river and smashed to pieces and died. A giraffe that was walking by said, "What did you do that for?" And the elephant said, 56 years ago today, I came down to this very river, and at this very point, that very turtle came up to me and nipped me on the end of my trunk. I've got turtle recall." Now, while we pause for the huge amount of laughter that which must be ensuing, we all know what elephants are famous for: the ability to never forget, to have total recall. But the ability to be able to just recall information is actually considered the lowest level of intelligence. And our elephant didn't want to be known for just having an excellent memory, being able to recall information, just having knowledge, which we can see at the bottom level of these steps. Our elephant wanted to climb all the way up to the top of those steps and be known as an incredibly intelligent elephant. And the elephant didn't know, but what he was actually thinking about was this chap here called Benjamin Bloom. And Benjamin Bloom has got a lot to answer for, because back in 1956, Benjamin, who was an educational psychologist, got together with other educational psychologists, and they came up with a taxonomy called Bloom's taxonomy, which was a classification system that measured people's cognitive ability. And they recognized that there were three forms of intelligence there: cognitive, psychomotor intelligence, which is to do with manual or physical skills, and affective intelligence, which is to do with feelings or emotions. But when we're actually writing essays to do with leadership and management, we're very much in that cognitive field: knowledge, our ability to be able to use our mental skills here. And this was the cognitive hierarchy that Benjamin and his friends at the American Psychological Association came up with. So these are the steps that the elephant was going up. Knowledge at the bottom, forming a real foundation, the ability to be able to call facts, to be able to know that knowledge that you have got in your head. But we work our way up and we go through knowledge to understanding, then application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. We get these facts, we understand what they mean and how we can actually then go and use them, application. Once we've used them, we can analyze, think more deeply about it, until eventually we can come up with our own. We become masters in that cognitive field. Now, one of Benjamin's learners, who was called Lauren Anderson, a student of Bloom, came along and said we should turn the taxonomy the other way around and have a triangle which is narrow at the bottom, and change the word to just remembering, going up through understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, till eventually we reach creating that ability of total cognitive skill, where you can completely come up with a new way of doing things. And that's sort of gone out of fashion again a bit now. So we're back to the cognitive hierarchy being represented as a strong base of knowledge being at the bottom. Now, this is all particularly interesting, but becomes really interesting when we come to write assignments, because at whatever level you're at, there are going to be key words that can be associated with those levels so that people can actually test us, assess us appropriately. And the command words, these key words, become really, really important for you all to understand really clearly, because they tell you what you have to do in order to reach the level of assessment that you are at. And you've probably recognized these words from exams you've had in the past, because this is exactly what academics will do. Here we see Bloom's taxonomy from left to right, from knowledge all the way through to evaluation, which means that it's easier to harder. And there are these words, these command words, these key words, which are associated with each of the 6 steps. So if you want to test someone, assess them at the knowledge level of the cognitive hierarchy, you use words which are associated with it, like list and identify. You can go up through the steps of the hierarchy and there are different words to assess you at different levels. So when we're doing an ILM level 3 paper, you tend to get asked questions which are more in that blue zone there, describe and explain. If you're doing a level 2 paper, you might get more list and show and recognize. And the harder the paper you do, the more the words are going to be up around evaluate, judge, criticize. And this is really, really essential for you all to understand, because you must, when you are writing these assignments, present evidence which meets or surpasses the standard which is actually set by those command words, those key words. And that's what we're going to be looking for in terms of responses to those words so that we can assess you as being sufficient. So you're going to either be doing a level 3 or a level 5. Most people are doing a level 3 here, and you are going to see words a lot, like I said earlier, describe, explain, and some identify in there. At level 3, you do get one question which asks you to evaluate. And there's a bit of text there at the bottom, which is from the judging sufficiency from the ILM, which says assessors, which is often ourselves, tutors, and learners, you, must examine the verb used in the assessment criterion. It becomes essential that you know what it means in terms of the definition that the ILM have, not what you think it means. So here's a list where we've put into, maybe an easier way of understanding it, what identify means, what describe means, what explain means, and what evaluate means. And I could read these out to you, and you probably won't actually remember. So what I like to do on this seminar is something called Bloomin Dogs as a way of making it a little bit more memorable. So if we were in the world of dog assessment, and I was to ask you to list the parts of a dog, you're already beginning to recognize that that term list is a low-level command word. And if you're asked to list the parts of a dog, because it's plural, you know that it's going to be more than one. And if you're asked to list, that's exactly what you should do. As a bare minimum, you need to list. So there's 6 parts of a dog which are being listed there. Listing is easy. It's an easy command word to do, but you're not going to be asked to list. At level 3, you will be asked to identify. So if we had to identify the parts of a dog, it is not what you might think, that there's going to be a picture of a dog and we're going to say, could you identify where the tail is? Identifying is a specific type of response that you need to do. And that is, you are listing with a little bit more information so that it demonstrates, what the thing, the part here, is actually for. The nose is a wet thing for sniffing. The tail is a bony structure at the back which wags when it's happy. So again, identifying is listing with a bit more information. So if you were to be asked, say, maybe identify areas of underperformance in the workplace, you are not going to list those areas. You're going to identify them, which is listing with a little bit more information. We must accept their definition of what the word identify means. So let's work our way up a little bit through Bloom's taxonomy and go for describe the tail of a dog. Well, as soon as I say describe the tail of a dog, you're probably thinking of a specific tail. We might have a real example. And when you get the word describe, you must always put in a real example. It's going to be the thing we're looking for as an assessor. Is there a real example there? So yes, you build upon the definition of what the tail is with your identify, that it's a bony structure towards the back, which usually covered in fur and is going to wag when they're happy, but we need that real example. That's a real example there. And then you can actually describe what that real example looks like. Here we have a 2-tone dog tail with a distinct curl to the right. The fur is soft, it is fluffy, and it's very clean. Always put an example if you get the word describe. In regards to going up the hierarchy even further, we now get to explain the tail of a dog. And hopefully you're beginning to recognize that unless you're a vet, you might not be able to explain the tail of a dog. You might be thinking, is it talking about what the purpose of the tail of the dog is for? But actually, when we get asked to explain, we want you to go into a lot of detail. Here we would probably see what I would consider to be the minimum acceptable standard for what explain is. We've actually gone into cross sections of the vertebrae of the dog. We're talking about electrical impulses, and we're recognizing that dogs' tails are not just there to wag when the dog is happy. Explain means we need real depth. You're also going to have to put in again a real example. You're building on what describing is and getting into that more precise, detailed answer. So we work our way further up the hierarchy and we get to this: assess the tail of a Siberian Husky dog. Well, it's asking you to assess the tail of a Siberian Husky. So we have to have that real Siberian Husky dog there. Now, assessing it is not describing. It's not comparing it against the tail of another dog, because it would say compare. It's saying assess. And when we get the word assess, there are certain key things which must be in place. With Siberian Husky dogs, we've actually got a standard which has already been set down by the Westminster Kennel Club. And they say that a Siberian Husky should be well furred, of round fox brush shape, set on or just below the level of the top line, and usually carried over the back in a graceful sickle curve when the dog is at attention. It should not curl too tightly to the right or to the left, or snap flat against the back. And its tail should be of medium length, approximately the same length all the way around. So we can already see that when we get the word assess, we need some standard. We need a criteria. And these criteria here, well furred, fox brush shape, on or just below the level of the top line, have fundamentally been listed here. It's just a list of the criteria. You could give more detail, you could identify or even describe what those criteria actually mean. But if we're looking at the bare level pass, the minimum criteria to be met, you need to list these bits of standard. Then we need a scoring system. We are not going to care particularly what that scoring system is, but you have to have a scoring system by which you can assess the standard, the criteria for the actual dog. And I can see that already people are probably going to be saying, oh yeah, I can assess that now because I've got a scoring system. I can make an assessment against those criteria. Well furred, it's obviously a 4. Neither side curl, I'm going to give that a 2. This enables us to get to a result where we can come to that conclusion and say, therefore, in my assessment, this is an okay to good tail with a score of 3.5 because it relates back to the scoring system that you have created. I also assess him as a very good boy, which, well, hugely amusing, isn't actually needed. But we have to have those 3 things in place. The thing we're assessing, criteria, scoring system, and then actually the result clearly stated. You must accept what their definition of the word to assess is. Now, evaluate the tails of a range of Siberian Huskies. This becomes really interesting because evaluate is very similar to assess. It is usually when we are going to be looking at a range of things, more than one. A range would usually mean at least a minimum of 3. So we need to have a decent range of Siberian Husky tails. So what I've given you here is a wide range, 4 tails. And I can tell people are already beginning to evaluate them because the standard is exactly the same. The scoring system can be exactly the same, and we can come to a justified conclusion which says that tail 4 is the best in an evaluation, and I scored it as 4.66 here. So hopefully what this has given you is an understanding that there are a hierarchy of cognitive need where there are words, the command words associated with each, so that when we get to actually look at an essay question, we can cut through the language to know what it is we have to do. And here we have some questions from 8600-323, which is understanding performance management. And the ILM and most academic organizations will talk about learning outcomes and assessment criteria. The learning outcome is what the learner will be able to do, which is know how to manage underperformance in the workplace in terms of this question. The assessment criteria is what you are going to be assessed against. So it becomes very interesting to us to look at this and say, well, this is learning outcome number 4. The actual questions are 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. And we can now cut through it because it says identify potential areas of underperformance in the workplace. You know what you have to do. And for those of you old enough to remember the Ron Seal adverts, it's do exactly what it says on the tin. It says identify potential areas. You had better therefore identify, list with a little bit more information, at least 2, because it says areas of underperformance. If you do identify 2 or more areas and it's worth 8 marks, you would score 4 marks. Now, this is a whole other world of frustration potentially. Why are they asking us to identify potential areas? And if it's worth 8 marks, I only get 4 if I do it. That's the way that assessment criteria-based essays like this works. If you answer the question at a higher level, you therefore decide that you're going to start to describe, to explain, or even evaluate potential areas of underperformance in the workplace, you will get more marks. But in order to pass, where the pass mark is 50%, you have to do what the question asks you to do. Now, I've got videos also on our YouTube channel, which talks about each and every single individual question, where I'm going to be saying basically, read the question. What does it tell you to do? So you must do exactly what the question asks you to. You can go higher if you wish. Imagine us being an assessor marking your paper. All we're going to be looking at is saying, it's asked me to assess you against identify. Have you at least identified? The points weighting is a good clue for how much response you should give, because if you look at 4.3 there, it says describe actions to restore performance to acceptable levels, and it's worth 12 marks. It's worth more marks. The command word is more demanding of you. It's describe, and it says to describe actions at least 2. So you better describe both, not describe one and identify one other. As a point here, there is no limit to the amount of words you can actually write. If you see the word count, it is a guide. That guide is how many words the ILM would estimate the average person would have to take in order to get the bare pass, which is 50%. And you have to get 50% or more in every single assessment criteria, not the essay overall. If you do not get enough marks against any one of those questions within it, you will be referred. So it becomes extremely interesting if we look at something like 8,600, 300, solving problems and making decisions, learning outcome 3, assessment criteria 3.1, where they actually ask you to apply a simple decision-making technique to evaluate options to arrive at the best solution. Seems innocuous, really easy question, but it's worth 24 marks. And while the learning outcome on the left, again, tells you what to do, we must do what the assessment criteria 3.1 asks us to do. You are going to have to apply. You're going to have to use a simple decision-making technique to evaluate. And as we well know from earlier, to evaluate means there's going to be a range of things. It asks you to evaluate options, and you're going to have a criteria, a scoring system, and a result to be able to justify you coming up with the best option. Now, the reason why evaluate is such a high level word in terms of Bloom's taxonomy is you are going to have to create your own criteria to score those options against. You're going to describe probably to us how you've allocated those scores, Was it you yourself, or was it a team of people? Can you give evidence showing that you've actually done that? You're going to have to then illustrate that scoring in a chart. I need to see your workings. And you're going to have to state at the end what the best solution was. And it tells you that in the learning outcome. State your chosen solution clearly and concisely. Now, where this then becomes really interesting is if you align the question against the mark sheets. We are able to give you the mark sheets, and the mark sheets back up absolutely everything that the cognitive hierarchy and the command words have said. So here we see the sufficiency descriptors, whether you would be referred, gain a pass, or a good pass against that question. Now you can head for the pass, 50%, and you can do what it tells you to do. A simple decision-making technique has been used to evaluate the options individually or together. And you've used decision-making criteria that have been identified, i.e. listed with a bit more information. You tell us what the criteria is, although it might be a little bit limited. And you've taken it all into account to get to a decision. If you want to get a higher pass, you would do a thorough evaluation of the options with the decision-making criteria described. It tells you what to do. So always go and look at the mark sheet to give you this guide. Here it tells you that your options are weighted and ranked to arrive at the best solution. So when you've got your scoring system in place against criteria, you could say that some of those criteria are more important than others. We might apply a weighting to it where we times it by 1.25 or whatever. You are doing the thinking. You are doing that creation of the evaluation in order to get to that best solution. And that's what we're going to be looking at. So, as I say, we have got each assessment criteria still on our YouTube channel, General Training. You could support each other through this. Talk to other people who are on your course and say, well, have you done what the question asks you to do? And of course, you can always come to us by sending your drafts into drafts@generaltraining.co.uk, where we'll be happy to come back and support you on the writing of your assignments. Thank you very much indeed.